Hey, we're back. We finished part one, which was the Windows prerequisites, and now we're going to deal with the Linux prerequisites. So, again, we're going to navigate up to the Azure Sandbox URL, which I just popped up there on the screen for you, and we'll pick up where we left off. Just follow the link for configuring the client environment. And we finished all this stuff, the Windows prerequisites, so we're going to move on to the Linux prerequisites. All right, so the first thing we need to install is Windows Subsystem for Linux. So we'll just follow this link. And if you've run updates on your computer, it should have the most recent binaries for WSL. And this command that they're telling you to use here should work. One tip would be to make sure you run Windows Update prior to trying this, because if you have an old version of WSL, it might be a different experience. All right, so we'll copy that command, and I'll just open us up a terminal window here. Oops. And what we want to do is we want to open this and run it as an administrator, because we're adding a Windows feature here. WSL install. This happens pretty quick. Now what this is basically doing is making it possible for you to run Linux VMs locally on your computer as a native feature of Windows. There's all kinds of shell integration. There's an app in the store, which if you run updates on your Windows Store apps, you can get new features and bug fixes instead of having to wait for the next release of Windows. A lot of developers, who want to, run Windows use WSL to do their Linux development. Okay, so everything's installed, and we're going to have to reboot. So I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll pick back up after we reboot. Okay, we're picking up after the reboot. So, while the system was restarting, there was like a lot of configuration happening because it's a Windows feature. WSL is a Windows feature. And then as soon as I logged back in, um, this terminal session popped up to complete the installation. What's happening now is WSL by default is going to go install the most recent long-term support or LTS release of Ubuntu Linux, which as of right now is 22.04, which is also known as Jammy Jellyfish. Gotta love those Linux names. So, um, this is a separate operating system, right? So, the root user has to get configured. So we'll go ahead and configure that. So I'll enter a username and a password, and this is what we'll use to, as essentially an administrative or root user account on our Linux installation. Use a strong password here. Oops. All right, cool. So it's wrapping up the install. So we've got both the Windows subsystem for Linux and a Linux distro installed, which is Ubuntu 22.04 Jammy Jellyfish, and we've set up um, the administrative account that we're going to use on that operating system installation. Cool. So just like we expected, it's Ubuntu 22.04. So remember, we have all of our instructions up in the sandbox link. So just as a reminder, that's aka.ms slash Azure Sandbox. So let's navigate back up there and pick up where we left off. Okay, so we're doing the Linux prerequisites. We finished this first step. We've installed um, Windows subsystem for Linux. And now what we're going to do is we're going to install this Python Java Web Token library, or pyjwt. I'm sure that there's a tricky way of pronouncing that, but I don't know it. So this particular library is important because it's used in some of the Azure Sandbox automation scripts to determine who the currently signed in user is for the Azure command line interface. So we basically take a look at a Java Web Token and we can pull your security principal ID out of that, right, using this library. And then once you have that security principal, you can use it to authorize the currently signed in user to do things. And we'll see that later in some of the automation scripts. So let's go ahead and run these commands. I'll just run them one at a time. Sometimes, if you copy this whole, batch of commands and try to run it all at once, you can have some strange behavior from the command prompt. So I'll just run these one at a time. So our Windows terminal is, or our Linux terminal is still open from the post configuration. So let's run this first command. So what this does is it just runs an update on all the currently installed packages. Okay, that's completed. So we've got all updated software. Now this second command installs pip, which is the Python package manager, and you use that to install various Python libraries like the one that we need to install. So this second command here is what we're going to run. And again, that's going to install the pip package, which is a Python library package manager. And we need that to install this particular library, the pyjwt library. And that's just a dependency that's in some of the automation scripts for Azure Sandbox. All right, cool. So pip's installed. Now we'll run this third command, which actually installs the pyjwt library. All right, good to go. Successfully installed. All right, what's next? So next, we're going to install the Azure CLI. So I'll go ahead and open that link in a separate tab. Now, as you can see, Azure CLI has different installation instructions for different environments. We're going to be using this one for Ubuntu. And, there's a single command install here. I'm going to actually opt for the step-by-step so you can get a better feel. That single command option, if it fails, you don't know where it fails. So we've already run this apt get update, so we don't have to run that again. This second command here is what we're going to run next. We're going to install, make sure that all the packages that we need for the Azure CLI are installed. Now, some of these may already be installed, but it's just a precautionary step to make sure that everything that Azure CLI needs is actually already on the system. Looks like we were only missing one thing, which is apt transport HTTPS. So everything else was already installed. Okay, so all those packages are already in there. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to make this directory for the key ring. So there's GPG keys associated with these packages, and those are stored in key rings. And so there's a recommended location for this keyring folder, etc apt keyrings. I've seen different standards for where that keyring gets located, but this is just kind of, how the Azure CLI team recommends creating this particular keyring. Okay, so we know that directory is there now. And the second command makes me nervous because it's, basically on multiple lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, pull up good old Notepad, and remove these character returns, or these carriage returns. Again, sometimes when you copy and paste this stuff into the command prompt, it kind of behaves weird. So I like to take the line feeds and the carriage returns and stuff out. So this command here basically downloads the Microsoft GPG key that is used by the Azure CLI, and then we dearmor that key, and then this last command adds it to the key ring, and the output gets sent to dev null because the key itself has a bunch of special characters in it which are gobbledygook, which aren't really helpful to be echoed out to the terminal. So I'll copy these and pull our terminal back up. And these are, basically 3 commands run simultaneously, with a pipe. All right, so that's done. And this T command adds it to this file, microsoft.gpg. So if we do an ll/etc apt keyrings, we should see this new file, microsoft.gpg. And there it is. And that has the GPG key that the Azure CLI uses to validate that the package is valid when you go to install it. This is all about integrating Azure CLI with the native package manager in Ubuntu, which is apt. If you didn't do this, you'd be manually installing binaries and you wouldn't be able to get updates and things like that. So this is the right way to do it so you can get all your updates. Okay. Now this last command changes the privileges on that keyring file, and the privileges are GO plus R. So I'm not completely sure what all of those privileges are, but I'm assuming that's what apt needs in order to use the key. All right, so now we're going to move on to adding the Azure CLI software repository to apt. So the first thing we do is we set up this environment variable. So we'll run this command. And let's go see what's actually in there. Go start. Remember, Linux is case sensitive. Okay, so we created this environment variable, and we got its value from this, environment variable lsb release-cs, and the release is Jammy Jellyfish. So this will tell apt which specific release of Ubuntu the Azure CLI binaries need to come from, because it gets recompiled for different releases. All right, and then here's one of my scary 2-line commands. So we'll do our notepad approach here and get rid of the line feeds. Okay, looks like we're good. This is all single line. There's no carriage returns or line feeds. So we'll copy this out. Take a look at what this command is doing. So, left to right, we're creating a string that represents this particular package. You can see that the specific release, that environment variable we created, is referenced here. So everything between this deb and this main is a string that we're going to add to this Azure CLI.list file. Okay, let's run that. Now, if we go look at this file, so we got an echo come out. So this line right here shows you the text that was added to this Azure CLI.list. So if I go out and I look at that file, let's just look at the directory first. We could see that Azure CLI.list. This basically is a file that's going to tell the apt package manager where to go get the Azure CLI. And if we cat that file out, we should see that same string that was echoed back to the console. Yep. there it is. All right, cool. So let's see what else we need to do to get APT working with the Azure CLI. All right, now we're actually ready to go install some stuff. Now that we've configured the package manager with the correct GPG key and the right package information. So it is important to run this command first because there's new packages in the mix. Okay, so now that we've done that, we know that all the changes we made to register that package with Ubuntu, so far so good. That's working because you can see in the output that, it's starting to talk about the Azure CLI as one of the packages. But we haven't actually installed the Azure CLI yet. We've just basically registered the package with APT. All right. And the last command here, actually, we're finally to the point where we can install the Azure CLI. And here it comes. So because of all that work we did up front, APT knows exactly which package to install, and it has the right keys to verify that the package is legit. Okay. So that's it for the Azure CLI. We are good to go. Like if we go back, well, we'll check versions and stuff later. All right, now that we've installed the Azure CLI, we're going to install Terraform next. And note here, it's not necessary to complete the quick start tutorial in these HashiCorp documentation. So this will be a similar process that we went through to install the Azure CLI, but this time we're going to be using, you'll notice in the docs here, I say Terraform, install Terraform Linux, Ubuntu, Debian. So we need to actually go click on those links. There's no way you can deep link into these things. So you say link Linux, and then we want the Ubuntu Debian instructions. Okay. So this is the same type of command that just makes sure that everything, all the packages that Terraform needs are on the system. Similar to the way it worked with the Azure CLI. So many of these things are probably here. So GNU PG was already there. Software Properties Common was already there. So we're all good. 0 upgraded, 0 newly installed, 0 to remove. Okay. And this next command goes and grabs that GPG key for Terraform. And basically, I think it's the same GPG key that HashiCorp uses for a variety of products, not just Terraform. And then you can see they create a keyring file. And you can see here that the keyring is created in a different location from the standard that the Azure CLI team used. So these keyrings can kind of be floating around in different places. And I've got carriage returns and line feeds in here, so I'm going to go strip those out so we don't get any weird behavior. So that / key means new line. Okay, So yeah, very similar thing. It's just the key ring is getting put in a different location than was for the Azure CLI. And this time we might get some funky output to the console because it's not uh, it's not suppressing that by sending it to dev null. And we did indeed get some funky output to the console. So let me clear the screen. And if we look at that last command we ran, I'm going to pick that apart a little bit and grab the path to that key ring. And we'll do a directory of that. So interesting, the standard that Microsoft used created a different directory. HashiCorp elected to use a different keyring folder that apparently Ubuntu likes to use. So my feedback to the Azure CLI team was, hey, why didn't you use this? Why did you put it in a different place? But anyway, you can see that the keyring that we created is there. It was created today. And so that step completed successfully. We're not going to cat it out again because it's just gobbledygook in there. It's a GPG key. All right. This is kind of like an optional step. You can go look at the fingerprint of the key and then compare it to what HashiCorp says is valid. So I'm going to skip that. And we're going to now do the same thing. We're going to add the HashiCorp repo to our list of official APT packages. Again, I'm going to strip out all these backslashes and character returns so that we can run this on a single line. So let's copy this command and paste it into our console. Okay, so here you can see we're building this string. It starts with deb and ends with main. And then we're going to tack it on to the end of this hashicorp.list file if it doesn't already exist. If it doesn't exist, that file will get created. And as before with the Azure CLI, this T command, TEE, echoes this back out to the console. If we go cat that file, or we should be able to see it. So this is the file that I want. I'm going to go erase all the rest of this stuff. And if I just do a cat on hashicorp.list, we see that same string. So we're all set up for APT now to go find the right repository to install this stuff. Same step, we're going to do a sudo apt update. That just makes sure that apt is aware of the package that we just configured. So you can see we've got Azure CLI and HashiCorp listed. And we can now go install Terraform. which is just one package. I think there's all kinds of other HashiCorp stuff that we could install if we wanted to, but we're just going to go install Terraform. That was fast. So these are all different commands to check out, what's installed. We'll skip that for now. All right, Terraform's on. Now our last installation is going to be PowerShell on Ubuntu. So we'll open that up in a new tab. And you should be getting familiar with this process now. We're going to have to go get a GPG key and do all kinds of stuff. So we just ran this command, so we don't have to worry about that. This is the catch-all. Make sure you have the right packages installed. I'm pretty sure we have all these already because we've already used these packages for the 2 previous installs. But hey, what the heck? We'll just be careful. Yep, so wget's there, software properties common is there, apt transport HTTPS is there, so everything that PowerShell needs is already on the system. All right, so now we're going to get the GPG key. And I appreciate the PowerShell team not sticking stuff on multiple lines. That's helpful. All right, so in this case, we're going to literally go download using wget the GPG key that the PowerShell needs to run. And I'm pretty sure it's just going to plop it in the current directory, but let's find out. So if I do a LL from the command prompt here, you can see that file that was just downloaded, packages-microsoft-prod-deb, is just sitting here in my home directory. So I'm assuming they're going to grab that and do something with it. And what they're going to do with it is they're going to register this package repository GPG key using this dpkg command. So this is a slightly different approach than was used by the Azure CLI or Terraform. So that's a pretty cool command. So it sets the package up for you. And notice with these release numbers, it figured out, that we're running on Jammy, which is Ubuntu 22.04. So this is kind of a cool approach the PowerShell team decided to take, slightly different. Again, we're going through all of this so that we can have these packages registered with APT so that we can go get updates. All right, we're going to do a little cleanup here. So we're going to get rid of that deb file. So I'm going to do an rm. Okay, they just don't want to leave that laying around. So thank you, PowerShell team. Very nice. And same thing, we're going to do a apt update. All right, so what do we have? We've got Azure CLI. We've got HashiCorp. Now we're seeing some other Microsoft stuff here, which I believe is the PowerShell release. So different GPG keys that the Azure CLI team is using versus the Azure PowerShell team and different packages. Unlike HashiCorp, which has one GPG key for all of their software. Okay. So this next one is going to go and install PowerShell. Cool. So PowerShell is installed. And we can check that one off. Okay, now there's one last step because the PowerShell scripts used by the Azure Sandbox actually require the Azure PowerShell module to be installed. And so we need to configure PowerShell to install that. So there's a little set of scripts here available to run those commands, and we'll do these a line at a time like we're always used to. So let's go grab this first line. And we're just going to download a configuration script from the Azure Sandbox repo and just drop it right here in the home directory. So now if I do an LL, you can see that we've downloaded that script. Okay. Now, that script is not executable, so we're going to make it executable with this chmod command. Whoops. I didn't get my copy. Here it is. So you can see if you look at the permissions there at the bottom for configure PowerShell, there's read, write, but there's no execute. So if I do another LL, you can see we've got execute privileges now on that script, and it shows up in green with a little asterisk that shows that it's executable. And as long as there's this construct in there called a shebang, Bash will know which script interpreter should be used to try to run the script. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is actually go run this script. So we have to run it using administrative privileges, so we'll use sudo to do that, and // and there's our script. And this will go install the Azure PowerShell module. So it configures the package manager for PowerShell to NuGet. And once it does that, we go pull the Azure PowerShell modules from NuGet. Okay, so Azure PowerShell is installed, and I'm pretty sure we're done here with the Linux prerequisites. Fabulous. So far we've completed the Windows prerequisites and the Linux prerequisites, and in the next video we'll go through this last piece of configuring VS Code for remote development in WSL. See you soon.